needs to get to. Perfect. I see we are now live streaming. So we will begin our meeting. So our first item for today is the heritage permit application HPA 2022 IV012 for 17 Schneider Avenue to replace the cedar shingle roof with asphalt shingles. Apologies. And we have Tina Malone Wright from planning, I believe, from the city, who is here to answer any questions. And Diksha is also here. So Diksha, do you have a presentation for this?
Chair, Diksha is unable to speak this afternoon, so she will be answering questions via the chat. So I will be the voice of Diksha this afternoon and try and answer any of the questions of the committee. So we're going to forego the presentations that Diksha had prepared. Okay,
perfect. Thank you for letting me know. All right. So all of you will have received the information via email over the last few weeks. So you've had a chance to look at it. So I will open it up to the committee for any questions for Diksha through Tina or any comments. All right, if there are no questions or comments, this item does require a motion. So if anyone is willing to move the question.
It's Alona. I do have a question. So I think that the applicant is proposing to replace the cedar shingles with asphalt. Were any other types of shingles considered, or any other type of roofing matter considered?
Yes, Diksha has advised that a cedar composite was also considered, but it was too expensive.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Right, would anyone care to move this question?
I'll move it.
Alona, perfect, thank you. So the motion in the motion before us that Alona has moved is that pursuant to section 33 of the Ontario Heritage Act, heritage permit application HPA 2022 IV012 be approved to permit the installation of asphalt shingles at the property municipally addressed as 17 Schneider Avenue in accordance with the supporting information submitted with the application. Any comments or questions on that motion itself? All right, I will remind the committee that if this motion does receive unanimous consent, it will be processed under delegated authority following our committee meeting. Otherwise, it will go to council on the June 20th meeting. So as per our online custom, I will do voting via the roll. Councillor Chapman?
I don't really like this process, but I support it. I mean, I feel I'm missing the presentation, which I'm not quite sure why we couldn't get a presentation of some sort, but I will support it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Chapman. Councillor Gazzola?
In favor.
Thank you. Robin?
In favor.
Thank you. Jean? Okay, Jean is nodding in favor.
Yes.
Thanks, Jean. Peter?
In favor.
Thank you. I am next. I am in favor. Ilana?
In favor.
Thank you. And Donnie?
In favor.
Thank you. Have I missed anyone? All right, seeing none, my cat also wants to vote, but is not a member of the committee, so their vote will not be counted. That does pass unanimously, so this will be processed under delegated authority following the meeting. All right, so we will then move on to our second item, which is the draft heritage impact assessment for 130 to 142 Victoria Street South, DSD 2022268. Again, Tina is in the room to answer any questions through our process so that Diksha is able to answer those. But we have Chris from Latorno Heritage Consulting, who will be sharing a 5-minute presentation and responding to questions as well. So I will invite the Heritage Consultants to give their 5-minute presentation.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for allowing the opportunity to provide an overview of the HIA and to answer questions. I'm also joined by several members of the project team who will be able to provide some additional answers regarding the design and the overall planning constraints. So the next slide here just situates us on the project site at the corner of Brom Street and Victoria Street South, and the HIA concerns 3 separate properties, 130, 138, and 142 Victoria Street South. The first property, 130, is on the next slide here, and that's the former Art Deco Macintosh Cleaners drive-through building, and the building itself has undergone some pretty significant changes, including most notably the loss of that distinctive Art Deco signage, as well as the yellow, black, and green vitrolite that was along that front. The next slide here, I won't read through it, it's a lot of text, but it's an overview of the evaluation that's found in section 6.1 of the HIA. Overall, the property in its current condition no longer retains cultural heritage value. It doesn't meet 906 anymore, although that distinctive drive-through the triangular canopy is still there. Even though it's been covered over, it is still there. The next property is shown on the next slide here, and that's 138 Victoria Street. It's a 2.5-story red brick residence built in 1931. Again, the next slide just shows the overview of the evaluation. This property also does not meet Ontario Regulation 906. But if you'll take a look at the next slide here, sorry to be zooming through these so quickly. So 142 Victoria Street South is the next property that we looked at. This is the Victoria Apartments building. It was constructed between 1929 and 1931 by August and Wilhelmina Hoffman, who actually lived in one of the 12 units once it was completed in 1931. On the next slide, you'll see an overview of that evaluation, of the 906 evaluation. This property does meet Ontario Regulation 906 for its design and physical value as a representative example of a vernacular apartment building of this time with an Art Deco influence. And the next slide here just sort of articulates what the heritage attributes that were identified are, including that stepped roof line, the door case that echoes the stepped nature of the parapet, the 1931 date stone, the Victoria Apartments signage above the door, those engaged pilasters at either side of the facade that flare out at the top, and just the overall buff brick construction. If you move on to the next slide, this is what's proposed. It's a 25-story residential building with 2 stories of underground parking. It sits on a 7-story podium along Brom Street, and then it's 2 stories in the current location of the Victoria Apartments building there, just next to 146 Victoria Street South. The next slide is just an overview of the impact assessment. This proposal does seek to remove all 3 of the existing buildings on this site. So we did identify direct adverse impacts from the loss of the Victoria Apartments building and the loss of all of its heritage attributes. And we looked at some alternatives in order to mitigate and lessen those potential impacts. The next slide just provides an overview of the preferred alternative. So the planning constraints, most notably the required location for the entrance to that underground parking lot, are creates like extensive impacts on the Victoria Apartments building. And so in order to mitigate that, we've recommended deconstruction, including selective panelization to pull apart the building that's there, and then the reuse of materials and the heritage attributes integrated into the new podium design. And the next slide just shows a bit more detail of carrying through that podium into the design of the existing building and the materials, and carrying that through into the new podium. And you'll see there just the extent to which that entrance and the requirements for that entrance really do take up most of the facade of the building. And then if you'll click onto the final slide here, there's some details. So we've recommended the deconstruction and reuse. So there's opportunities to reuse not just the brick, but signage throughout, carrying through those sandstone inlays. And the new design also presents some opportunities for carrying through some of those features from 130, the former Macintosh Cleaners building. So there's an opportunity for reuse of that canopy in an outdoor space on level 7. And the buff brick from the rear of that building is also very similar to the buff brick from Victoria Apartments, because they were constructed around the same time. And so there's an opportunity to carry through some of that material as well. So that's the Coles Notes of the HIA. Thank you for providing this opportunity just to run through the HIA. And as I said, several members of the project team are also available just to talk through some of those project constraints and planning constraints that led to this alternative.
Great, thank you very much. So we will now entertain questions and comments from the committee. As a reminder, because it's a heritage impact assessment, staff is looking for feedback from the committee on this. So I will open up the floor. No one ever wants to go first. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, how many people are going to be displaced from affordable housing units in this, if this were to go through?
Matthew Lang may be the best person to answer that, if I might direct that to him.
Yeah, Councillor Chapman, I'll have to get back to you on that. I believe it's 11, but I'd like to confirm. And in terms of their rent category, I need to confirm that as well.
That's 11 households or 11 people?
11 units. I don't have a count on the people.
Thank you.
Other comments and questions from committee? Councillor Chapman?
Yeah, if nobody else wants to speak. I was just wondering if, you know, when you look at the front of the building as it is right now, and you look at that podium section on the left-hand side, although there are some features that have been transferred over there, you know, the placing of the windows and things is dramatically different. I was wondering if there's any consideration of trying to replicate it more closely.
I'll let Denny speak to that, principal architect from CORE. That's, to me, always an interesting conversation, because there's a distinction when you don't try to replicate or copy. And so in one hand, it can provide a greater clarity to the building. And then on the other side, again, I'll let Denny speak to it because he's the designer. But one of the things that we try to do is carry forward that masonry. But Denny, why don't you speak to this?
Sure, thanks. Thanks, Matthew. So the issue that we have with maintaining the existing kind of windows/window patterns are twofold. Number one, that the floor-to-floor heights of the existing property don't necessarily align with what we have in the current building and the current minimum requirements, for example, for the vehicular access. So that immediately throws it off. And I think what we tried to do is borrow some of the elements of the existing windows. So in other words, the transom and the sill in precast, and coordinate the pattern of that glazing to work a little bit better with the new opening that we have to create for the vehicular access. So that's kind of a two-pronged answer as to why we couldn't exactly reuse what was there. And the units just in the sense of how they're kind of used today, just in terms of maximizing the amount of glazing and the amount of light that goes into the unit. So we've tried to balance those things. So there's still punched windows, which are punched windows on the existing facade, but still trying to allow some light and bring in some of those characteristics and elements that currently exist on those windows. Thank you.
Thanks. Other questions or comments? Donnie.
Hi, thank you, Chair. I guess this will go to the LHC. My question was, I couldn't find the age of 138 Victoria Street South. I was wondering if you guys know particularly when it would have been built.
So 138 shows up on the 1931 city directory as new residence or new house. So it would have just been completed prior to when the surveying was done for that 1931 city directory.
Okay. And a follow-up question, sorry. The yellow building, I forget what the address is for that one, but that one, so were they roughly built within the same time frame then? Or
Yes.
Would it have been earlier? Okay.
Yeah, so the properties were surveyed and subdivided and sold at the end of the 1920s into the early 1930s. So a lot of the development in that area took place in a similar time frame.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Chapman.
Sorry, I have another question about the inhabitants. So, and I know this isn't specific to heritage, but if we're talking about the demolition of these buildings, we don't know how many people are going to be displaced. Do we know if there are any affordable housing units that will house these people that will be displaced in the new build?
Yeah, that's a great question, Councillor Chapman, and that's something that we'll look to have a conversation with you about as we move forward in processing the application.
If I may add to that, to the committee and to Councillor Chapman's question, it's Victor Labreche, planning lead of 5EI Group in Waterloo as the planning consultant. And in terms of, and maybe Tina Malone-Wright, please feel free to speak to this as well. It is subject to demolition control in terms of the related bylaws, and there are some stipulations there to accommodate those displaced residents within the proposed new development. So that's all part of the consideration, as Matthew had said. And in terms of the details, we don't know directly at this point if the rents that are charged to those 11 units in the building are actually considered under the parameters as affordable at this point. I would suspect they're close. And that would have to be carried over in either finding a new location for those residents, either within this building or elsewhere within the immediate area. And Tina, please add to it as you wish. Thank you.
Yes, this is something that we are looking at through our development approvals and planning applications, and working with property owners and developers and trying to find a solution in the interim for people that will be displaced.
Great, thanks for that clarification. Other questions or comments? All right, well, I have a comment, so I will take this time. So first, I wanted to note that there was a very specific and detailed narrative description in the Heritage Impact Assessment, which we don't always see so much detail and narration. And so I just wanted to comment on that because I think it was really well done and could potentially be, as we move forward with the project, something that may be useful as a bit of a commemorative piece moving forward. I do have some concerns around what partially conserved heritage attributes means in this context. And so I would like a little bit more clarification on what specifically would be preserved in this context, whether you would just be moving pieces of the old building onto the new platform, or like how that would all work. I think I just need a little bit more specification on that. And then I certainly have a lot of concerns about the reuse of the date stone if the original building is being demolished, just because I know in the HIA there was a mention of putting up a plaque or some sort of wording to indicate that this was not the original building and that the 1931 does not represent this new build. But I still have concerns about that being misinterpreted or misread. And so I just wanted to note those, but I will allow you to answer my first questions.
And I think those are definitely fair comments. We've noticed it in the HIA, and it's a delicate balance, not so reusing as much as we can so that just from a sustainability perspective, we're diverting all of that from landfill, but B, to ensure that all of the embodied energy, all of the cultural heritage value that's embodied in these materials can be retained and kept. And the interpretation of that is a big piece of it, not just the making it very clear which piece of, that this is a reconstructed new building with salvaged and deconstructed materials. The exact extent to which materials can be reused, that's as design progresses, is going to have to be figured out based on the condition of those materials. And that's going to progress and continue to evolve as the project continues in planning. But certainly the reuse of things like the date stone have to be very carefully considered to make it very clear that it's not. So it may be a matter of moving that piece to, for example, an interior location or to moving it to closer right beside the interpretive feature, for example. So those are all definitely really good considerations as design and the details get sorted out.
Great, thank you. Other comments or questions?
Hi, it's Alona.
Alona?
I have a question in regards to the 142, the apartment building. So what is going to happen with a building while it is going to be, it's going to be dismantled, I guess, and then reassembled into the new structure? How is it going to be kept while they're waiting to reassemble it?
So those details will be sorted out as part of a conservation plan, just to determine what's being deconstructed, how it's being deconstructed, and then the storage will also be a consideration as part of that. It would have to be stored either on site in a safe manner or off site nearby, and cataloged so that it's clear where things come from and where things go back.
Okay. I would also agree that it is exceptionally well written. This was a pleasure to read. But I did notice one tiny little thing that jumped out at me, and it was on page 38. It mentions that the property sold for $40,000 in 1935, which I think is highly unlikely.
I will double check that because I think you might be correct.
But I think it was exceptionally well written. Thank you.
Debbie Chapman, I see a hand again.
Yeah, sorry. I just wonder if this is, aside from the York Apartments on Queen Street, is this the only other building in the city of this style?
So I can't answer that with complete certainty because we didn't do a full comparative of the entire city. There are certainly similar comparatives that we looked at in terms of vernacular buildings that pick up on Art Deco style. So, and this is on the earlier side of those Art Deco inspired buildings. But Kitchener does have, for some reason, a wealth of Art Deco commercial buildings, and there are a few other examples of apartment buildings, but I can certainly look into more comparatives for a revised HIA.
Thank you.
Other comments? Going once? All right. Well, thank you all for your comments. I'm sure that Diksha and the planning staff will use those comments as they move forward with the process, and we will hear back at some point. These processes always take a while, so we will certainly hear back. All right, well, let's move on then to our next draft heritage impact assessment, which is 22 to 26 Charles Street West, DSD 2022269. So again, Tina and Diksha are here. Donnie, I see you have a hand.
Hi, sorry, Chair. I'm gonna have to recuse myself for the next 3 HIAs due to conflict of interest.
The next 2 HIAs and then
Yeah.
Okay. And then the permit application as well?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay, sorry about that.
That's okay. Sarah, do you want or need Donnie to do anything specific?
Madam Chair, it will be sufficient if Donnie mutes himself and turns off his camera for the remainder of his items.
Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, Sarah. All right, so Donnie will be muted and camera off for those items. Thanks, Donnie. We'll see you later. Okay. Where did we go? Draft HIA for 2022 22 to 26 Charles Street West. There's too many twos. Okay, so Tina and Diksha are both here, as are Christopher Levin from PHC Group, David Galbraith from IBI Group, and Mark Villemer from SRM Architects, who are here to respond to questions from the committee. And I believe Sarah is going to move them over. Right here, yes. So we'll just give them a moment. All right, and did you folks have a short presentation? Or are you just able to answer questions today?
Hi, yeah, this is Dave Galbraith here. I'm a manager of planning with IBI Group out of Waterloo. I know Diksha would normally provide a presentation. We weren't going to provide one today and just be available for comment, but if it would assist the committee, we could do a quick walkthrough of the development proposal from a planning, architectural, and heritage perspective, if that would be helpful to the committee.
All right, committee members, just like a thumbs up or a thumbs down if it would be helpful. All right, there were a lot of thumbs that came up very quickly there. So if you could take 5 minutes to just provide a quick overview for us, that would be very helpful.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for the time today, and thank you to City of Kitchener staff, both in the planning department and urban design and heritage. We've had a lot of discussions to get to this point. Both formal pre-consultation and then informal working group sessions with Diksha and urban design staff, and it's been very helpful, and it's helped to transform the design of this project as well as the one that we will talk about following this. But the proposal for 22 to 26 Charles Street is for a 44-story residential development containing 455 units. Recently, there was a site plan application submitted for the development that was made in the middle of March. We have our site plan committee meeting actually coming up tomorrow. As you will see on the proposed renderings and elevations that were submitted as part of the package to the committee, the applicant is proposing to retain the street-facing facade and the northern facade of 24 Charles Street as part of this proposal, and incorporating that into the base of the development. So as part of the site plan application, an HIA was prepared by PHC Group, and I'm joined by Chris Lemon of PHC, who can speak to the HIA. But before we do that, maybe I'll hand it over to Jeff and Mark from SRM to provide a bit more details from an architectural perspective.
Sure. I'm not sure if it'd be appropriate to share screen, or if someone has an image of the building, we could certainly talk about it, I guess, with more clarity if we were looking at it.
Through you, Madam Chair, meeting participants are not able to share their screens, and materials for presentation are to be submitted in advance of the meeting for review. Dave, I don't know if any of your attachments included a visual of the building. I do have them available here.
Okay, yeah, just one second. I'll pull up the email that I had sent you yesterday. I had sent the renderings. That would probably be the best bet if you're able to pull those up.
Just one moment, please.
Yeah, and just, oh, there you go, you found it.
Perfect. Well, this is, I guess, an overall view, and looking at, I guess, both projects that we're talking about today. But the one to your left is 24 Charles, or 22, 26 Charles. And in it, we were maintaining the existing warehouse, former warehouse building in the podium, and wanted to incorporate it within our building, but being also respectful of its contextual location. We also needed to provide, because it is a very small site, we were building above it and beside it, and then the tower itself would be basically springing from the building itself, the existing warehouse building. The overall sort of intent was to create a dialogue between the two buildings. It's the same developer, and the play of light and dark within a similar tower language was intentional, and trying to have the buildings read as a whole from a distance, having a connection. Both have heritage components that are being maintained and integrated into the building, yet wanted to have a distinct sort of language as well. So those are the big design moves, I would think. Oh, thanks. That's helpful. This is the side elevation.
And Sarah, I was wondering if you could also pull up the podium elevations file or the podium renderings file. Great, thanks, Jeff and Sarah. Chris, I was wondering if you might be able to walk through the findings of your HIA and some of your recommendations.
Yes, I can attempt that. We evaluated 22, 24, and 26 Charles Street as separate entities and followed the 906 criteria and found that of those 324, Charles Street does have make a contribution to the heritage of the area, and should we recommended to move for it to be to retain the facade and the side there, and to incorporate it into the podium. 26 being the vacant lot had no heritage value, and 22 was found to have been heavily altered and to not be of particular value to the area. So the recommendations were to focus on 24 Charles Street.
All right, thanks very much for that presentation and for the information. I'm hoping that it was helpful for our committee members. So again, this is a draft heritage impact assessment, so staff are looking for comments and feedback from the committee. So I will open it up. Questions and comments from the committee. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, just a question about procedure. So this is going to site plan review tomorrow?
Yes, that is correct.
So, and it's coming to us today?
So the site plan review committee meeting had been scheduled a couple months ago. And as part of that, we have received comments back from heritage planning staff, or we will be receiving their formal comments tomorrow, but in order to inform their comments, they're also looking feedback on the HIA that can be provided at that meeting through heritage staff.
And this is not something we're voting on, we're simply giving comments, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
So we're providing comments that will help inform the report that staff ultimately write regarding this, which sounds like it will be tomorrow. Peter.
It's a question regarding the program for the building. The podium base, if I read it correctly, is a parking structure? Or, and the residential component of the building starts at the 7th floor? Just want to confirm that I'm reading that correctly.
So through you, Madam Chair, the base of the development will actually include publicly available amenity space that's being provided. Jeff, are you able to comment on the actual, I don't have the site plan right in front of me right now, but it will also include a lobby area to the development as well as all of the services. There will be above grade parking as well.
So what is the size of the public amenity area?
Sorry, I'm just looking for the area. The majority of the front of the heritage structure, the warehouse, will be amenity space and lobby. So parking is above the heritage and underground as well. So there won't be, parking isn't the majority use of the first 2 or 3 floors of the structure. And we also have a through parking, through drive lane accessing Halls Lane and then Charles. So traffic will be coming off of Charles just throughout the Port Cochere in the building, and that is also where the underground and parking is accessed through the covered area. So it's not directly from the street. That helps explain it. The white part of the building above is parking, or sort of screened glazing, frosted glass, for lack of a better word. The would at night create a lantern of, I guess, trying to make make the parking more of a feature above the building, so it would glow at night, and during the day would read as opaque.
Thank you.
Do you have other questions or comments, Peter? Okay, so I have Ilona and then Jean. Ilona, you are muted currently.
I had a question about the staircase that's in the current building. It's a very interesting looking industrial staircase, but it's not listed as one of the heritage attributes for the interior. Is there a reason why that is not going to be maybe brought forward? Because I thought it was just really an interesting feature that would look very good in the new building as well.
It was not identified because I'm not actually sure if it's original to the structure, because the interior has been adaptively reused currently.
Okay. Again, I thought it was a really interesting report to read. There was a lot of history provided, so it was really very well written.
Great, thanks, Ilona. Okay, I have Jean, and then I think I have Peter, and then I may have Councillor Gazzola. So Jean, I will pass it to you first.
Thank you, Chair Sam. I have a question for the developers. So this design, as I read it, consists of 46 stories, and it seems to me like there's a ton of glass. So I'd like to know what your awareness of the bird flight patterns are going to be, or are.
I can take that question through you, Madam Chair. That's a wonderful question. And that's something that we've been exploring right now with lazy manufacturers with bird-friendly glass, particularly at certain elevations where we know there's migratory birds versus what's happening at the lower levels. So that's something that we are actively seeking technical information in terms of where we can locate a bird-friendly glass with the film, which it evidently is more expensive, but it's very important, particularly on developments such as this, where we're doing, like you identified, tremendous amount of glass, not only on the residential components of the tower, but also on the lower level podiums with this light box idea that we're carrying forward. And so that's something that is certainly going to be contemplated and implemented in our eventual formal site plan design that we're working through right now.
So if I may, how would you describe bird-friendly glass?
Bird-friendly glass, I'm not an expert, but what I can certainly say is when we speak to manufacturers with features that have been added to the glass, it's effectively a film that the way I understand it is it's visible to in a certain wavelength. And so whereas birds would see it as something that's highly I don't want to say highly reflective because that can reflect the environment and create confusion. It's more of, it seems like an opaque surface so that a bird is not seen through a corner, for example, of the building, where it would say, oh, I want to fly around there, and it would actually hit, a solid surface. And so it's not only treatment of glass, but it's also placement of windows in relation to the environment and corners of the development.
Right, and if I may, to staff, I really think it behooves us as a community to be concerned about these flight patterns and our final designs for these buildings. You know, we do know that in the city of Toronto, they scoop up every morning pails and pails of birds. And I don't think that this is what we in Kitchener really want to end up with. So those are my comments. I know, I guess if it's heritage for nature, it's about the birds. So staff, I would really like this to be understood. And I hear from the developers that there's an interest in looking after it. But before things are approved in the design, I really hope that we have guarantees of this and the glass well researched. Thank you.
Thanks, Jean. Peter, did you still have a hand?
I'm not sure if we're at the comment stage yet.
We're taking questions and comments all at once. So if you have a comment, now is a great time for it.
I just wanted to touch briefly on a phenomena that we're seeing in all of the HIA that we're looking at today, and that is it goes by the name of facadism, right? And it's characteristic where the only thing retained about the heritage building in a redevelopment is its very thin face. The rest of the building is subsumed and another building is built in its place. We seeing different examples of it today, and this one has its own characteristics to it. For me, facadism is kind of the low bar of heritage conservation. It sort of is it's almost like the least that can be done in retention in order to achieve the really large scale development that is driving the transformation of the site. In this case, we have the facade that is placed into a it's an arrangement that we don't see elsewhere, is that it's placed into a parking garage, and the parking garage itself has we called it a light box effect. I appreciate the design intent on it, but for me, it reads more that in a day, it's a facade that does not read. It's a facade that's kind of blank and has no eyes, onto which the historic face of the other building is kind of transposed. So it doesn't have, for me, a sort of relationship between the facade of the building, the facade of the historical building, and the facade of the new building. That I think is something that could be improved. What's disappointing, I find also about facadism, is that there's just no intention to save anything behind the walls. This is a post and beam warehouse, I believe, style. And it is lost. And my fear is that facadism sort of becomes the default position of developers and the default acceptance of planners. So I think that there is room for improvement here. I think that in the last one we saw, there was a great benefit for a connection of the materiality of the new building and the materiality of the old building, which I don't think is existing here. Also, the fenestration and the articulation of the fenestration on the historic building looks like it could be on any office or condominium building in the downtown, and it doesn't particularly speak to the era that it's in. I believe that this project has some merits and some ways to improve, but thanks. That's my say. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter. Councillor Gazzola, did you have a hand up?
No, I didn't. I was just adjusting something. Sorry.
No, that's okay. It's hard to tell these days, so I appreciate that. Mark has their hand up. Are you responding to a question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So through you, Madam Chair. So Peter, I appreciate your comments, and I actually genuinely wholeheartedly agree. I think one thing that we've strive for in this development is how can we enhance the development and treat this as an adaptive reuse in terms of the space and the nature of the Art Deco structure. And one thing working through this design, and we're still working through the design right now, working with Heritage City staff, Dijkstra provided us some wonderful commentary and feedback just yesterday or a couple of days ago. Actually, it was just yesterday, and we're going to be making some design modifications already right now to work offline with her to ensure that what we're doing in terms of relationship between the podium and the light box relationship to the actual facade of the Art Deco building, what can we do to make it look less like an applique? The reality is right now, the current setup along the street, it is just a facade that's visible to the public realm. And so what we decide to do is, knowing that we've got daylight triangle and some road widenings, around the corner, sorry, not road widening, I apologize, just how the facade's being integrated into the design, particularly on, so I guess there's two properties here. And so, and I know with the shared examples, we were showing both projects, right? That was 88 Queen Street as well as the 24 Charles. And so in the case of 24 Charles, which is fascinating, there's a principal corner right now of that nice, beautiful building. And what we've done is we've gone out of our way to ensure that it's not a facade. We're maintaining the corner. So that's actually integrated into the geometry, not just the aesthetic, but in the facade, but the actual geometry of our site. And so we represent that. The example, though, for 88 Queen is the Art Deco, which looks like an applique, because right now the relationship is it's part of that's the straight wall effect. And so one thing we're doing right now is we're pulling our building back, the podium back, to create more breathing room between the relationship of the actual podium and the Art Deco piece, because we want to celebrate it only what it looks like at nighttime, which will be a big contrast to what it would look like during the daytime. Your commentary about the materials is interesting because we've done a lot to work around the facade and how it integrates with the rest of the facility, at least at the lower levels, because ground floor is all amenity and circulation. But what we haven't done is contemplate using some of that materiality on our actual podium and transitions to celebrate and to tie it back in. And that's something that we're very happy to look at some material samples and see what of relative, the masonry can we integrate into our building. We're not looking to demolish anything on the front. We're just going to restore it to what it previously was. But that's something that we're going to be working with offline, and we're happy to share it with yourself and your committee as we advance through the design process.
Thanks, Mark. All right, other comments or questions on this draft heritage impact assessment? Dave, are you responding to a question?
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to clarify something. I have my notes for both applications beside me, and I did make an error before. It's not the site plan review committee for 24 Charles tomorrow. It's for 88 Queen. I apologize for that. I just read the wrong notes. And so I do apologize. 26 Charles was submitted in later than 88 Queen. 88 Queen was submitted back in March of this year. So that meeting has been scheduled for a couple of months, but 26 Charles, I believe, is still a couple months away from that actual meeting.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Appreciate that. All right, committee, any further comments or questions on 22 to 26 Charles? All right, so again, it's a draft heritage impact assessment, so staff will take the comments and incorporate them into their reports as they move forward with this process. And I'm sure we will hear back about this again at some point in the next few months. All right, so we'll move then on to the next draft heritage impact assessment, which Dave has already alluded to, which is the 88 to 92 Queen Street South, DSD 2022271. And it's the same group of folks who are here for this draft heritage impact assessment. To the committee, would it be helpful if they also overviewed this project? All right, so I will pass it off to the team again to provide a brief overview of this next project, if that is all right with you.
Yeah, that's great. And again, sorry for the confusion. I misspoke before. Sarah, I was wondering if you might be able to pull up the 88 Queens Kitchener renderings file, that we might be able to speak to those. But again, my name is Dave Galbraith. I'm here on behalf of the applicant, who are proposing the redevelopment of the corner of Queen and Charles Street on the west side. The applicant is proposing a 44-story condominium in this location containing 567 residential units. As I misspoke on the previous file, the application was submitted earlier this year, back in March, with the site plan review committee scheduled for tomorrow, actually for this one. As you will see on this file, oh, actually, Sarah, could you go back to the last slide? I think that's what we're really going to be wanting to focus on in our discussions here. I'll pass it over to Jeff in a minute. But as you can see, much of the Queen Street facade has been incorporated into this development proposal, anchored by the building on the right, the Art Deco building. So again, it does include the entire length of the facade as shown here. One building is proposed to be removed at the corner, and the reason for that is due to a regional taking of a daylight triangle. The site is very close to the LRT tracks in this location, and it's actually a safety issue at this location. So that is why that has been proposed to be removed here, and there is a widening along Charles Street as well. But I will pass it over to Jeff now if you wanted to walk through the proposed elevations for this development.
Certainly, thank you. And I guess in response, or certainly to follow up on Peter's comments regarding facadism, this is certainly an example that would, I guess, be best described as facadism, mostly because trying to maintain the Art Deco building, the Pearl Laundry building, is basically the facade is the thing in this particular case. The facade was over two existing buildings. It was a brand new facade, so the intent was to treat it almost as a work of art, a sculpture in itself. Is that some of the unique brick patterns, the stonework is only on the facade. The buildings behind have nothing at all to contribute to that typology or that materiality. So the only thing of merit is the facade, and we wanted to highlight that as much as possible. The other two buildings that are being, I guess in this case, reintroduced are not prime examples of buildings. So the idea was that we were maintaining the street presence, the street sort of facade, and wanted the podium above to be reflective of that narrowing of Queen Street, especially in the next block closer to the Walper and King Street. There's a narrowness that I really like. I think it feels very urban, and the idea of having the 5-story structure at the corner helps to contribute, I think, to some of that urban feel. One of the big moves was creating that sort of overhang, that interstitial space between the old and the new, because the buildings aren't, I really wanted the building facades to integrate into the new building, as opposed to being held as a precious gem, which I think it reads better as a whole, and more of a holistic approach, as opposed to creating these display case buildings, which unfortunately they're not in the best of shape as it is. So we're trying to maintain the idea of the building more so than the actual building on the two to the side. So and then because of the road widening, gave us an opportunity to create an urban space, a covered room, as it will, at the corner, and the Pearl building contributes to that space, defining it. So hopefully,
All right, thanks, Jeff. And Chris, if you wanted to similarly provide a walkthrough of your HIA for this project.
Yes, what is very interesting about this is it is a facade. That is the heritage attribute, as we have been discussing. And in order to augment that, we've been working to retain the remainder of the street. And in keeping that, it does become a facade, yes. But it supports the Pearl Laundry facility that is the heritage, is the real heritage attribute of that block. Assessment of the interiors, there is they have been heavily altered. There is very little left in there, and it does not contribute to the Art Deco design of that structure, of that facade.
All right, thank you. Okay, so to the committee, any questions for the group or comments for Heritage Planning staff? And I see Tina has raised their hand.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that these are draft heritage impact assessments. Diksha has provided some preliminary comments on them, but she will not be finalizing her comments until she receives input from today's meeting.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tina. All right, so keeping that in mind, if you have comments that you would like to pass along to Diksha as she continues to prepare her comments, now is the time to do that. Jean.
Thank you, Chair Sam. So my comments are same as for the last one. Here's another 44-story, lots of glass, and staff needs to be really cognizant of the final design and how we are going to prevent the bird bucket pickup in the morning after it's built. So I really need staff to take that seriously. I have a retort to the justification of the facade. And I realize that for you who do not have associations with our city or our history, that the fronts of the buildings are facade. It's Art Deco, okay? It's something else, fine. What is missing in this whole story is the fact that there is a story behind the facade. And I have to say, when I spoke to other people who have read the agenda and said, another tower of 44 stories, you mean the Pearl Laundry? You mean to say that place where my grandmother sold buttons? And so our story is being eliminated by these towers. Granted, I'm not saying you shouldn't do your high rise and your apartments and so on, but it's the story that is in those buildings. So here I am. I have lived a long time in the area. I've studied the history. I walked the streets a lot. And for me, Pearl Laundry, really? Oh, yes, so-and-so went there. And did you know that so-and-so shopped there and so-and-so worked there? And the same way with, oh, so-and-so had the buttons there. And that's where my mother went for buttons to when they mended my clothes and sold my clothes and designed the clothes. So there are stories inside behind those walls. Granted, they're probably not in the greatest condition that you as a designer would like, but surely there is something that you can capture, or when you do your research, you can capture. And I don't know what is going to happen. I think you're bent on facadism and thinking that's the important thing, but really for staff to give this, we need to have the story of those simple buildings that work with everyday people. Everyday people went and shopped and patronized those businesses. We need to have that as part of this story. We can't just eradicate and say, well, 2022, look the towers we have. That is not our story. And I really want staff to encourage and figure out how we're going to get the stories behind those facades. It's more than just facadism. It's important to the people of this community. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Jean. Mark, do you have a response to?
Yes, thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Jean, I appreciate the comments. The first point about your comment on the previous development with respect to bird-friendly glass, and not only bird-friendly glass, but just a bird-friendly development in general, because these developments also have rooftop terraces with trees, and it also increases the likelihood of those types of concerns. We have a site plan meeting committee, not a site plan, it's just a site plan committee meeting tomorrow. And I will myself raise this issue on this project just to ensure that it's a point that's been discussed, and effectively volunteer the information to staff that we are actively reviewing what we can do and mitigating features. So I respect the fact the committee may bring that up, but I will also on my own accord bring that up. So that's an item that's specifically, because it's something that we are actively concerned about, just as you are. Your second point about the story, I couldn't agree more, and I love that idea. And I think I'm a rather sentimental person. I understand there's developments and spaces get reused and intensification, and there's a slew of other social issues, of course, that impact developments. But I think the story is important, and I think in this case here, where it is truly a celebration facadism, where we're not touching the building, we're going to restore it aesthetically from the front. But yes, it's effectively a commemorative piece that's integrated to this development. And I think doing additional research and history of the building is something that allows us to carry that idea of the story and provide that context into the future developments. And this is a simple example. We're already speaking with the marketing team to say, right now the Pearl, it doesn't actually say Pearl, right? I think it's obstructed with some signage or something, but it would be restored to its original original name. And we're already informing the design process at an early stage with marketing team, saying we want to celebrate the heritage of this site. And if it was Pearl, if Pearl was a name before, how can we integrate that into the story of what it's going to be in the future? There's a development that's built in Kitchener where there was a demolition of a church, Trinity United Church, and the church was removed and demolished. And it was sad to me as I grew up going United, and I understood the story. And I think what was fascinating with that development, they took the material and reintegrated the material into the current building. And of course, that's not what we're suggesting here. We're going to keep it. But one part I liked about that approach was that we're able to say, you see that stone over there in the corner? That was actually the cornerstone laid in 1900, whatever it was. And so there was a tangible, relatable, what you can touch now today and see what's there on site today is what was there 100 years ago. And then that development's still under construction, but there's going to be a large plaque, a board that talks about the history of the development. And so even though the use has clearly changed and intensification and housing, people call that place home, there's a history of what it was. And I think certainly in a situation where we're able to preserve the existing building, or at least portion, that facade of that building, we're, I think, celebrating the history and putting that history on display so that people who are not from Kitchener or moving, whether they're emigrated to the area or they just moved from a different part of the country, knew nothing about what that building was, the stories can live on. And I think we're looking for ways to celebrate those stories. And we always like to have a story and a theory behind why is there a project here? Why did you make all these decisions the way they are? And I like to draw on history. And I think that's something that on both this project and the 24 Charles Street project, part of the commemoration, I think, is not just in some HIA that's great for a committee and people at the city. It's not something that the average public will ever read or have access to. And I think taking the salient points of that and putting them on a plaque and putting it on something so that when people are just walking past here, they can see, oh, that's interesting. Why did you keep that? And then there's a story behind the history of that building. And that's something that I personally rather enjoy. I'm the kind of person that stops at those plaques and reads all of them. And I think that's something that I would certainly want to do here. Even though the building is staying, we can still celebrate the history and explain to people, as you said, what type of people went here and what was it used for. I think that's integral to the fabric of the community.
Thanks, Mark. Peter.
Yeah, just wanted to make a comment that I think that something that is missing in large sense from the heritage impact assessment is the value of all of the buildings on Queen Street together, right? The HIA goes through each one individually and says, oh, this one has some, and this one's not good, and this one's okay, and this one we have to get rid of, and it says, well, this piece of one is what we should save. Whereas the part of the intrinsic value is the entire assembly of the block, its relationship to the street, and its history of use on that street. And I think that because of how the building crowds so closely to that street, and there's an attempt to make an articulation on the sort of setting back the front part of the podium, but I don't think it does nearly enough to maintain that sense of that two-story historic building scale along that street. It's been kind of replaced with kind of an entrance lobby and a parking garage entrance, and some sort of nominal other uses that aren't quite clear. So I find it disappointing in the fact that we are celebrating the keeping of the facade, and we're not celebrating keeping the form of the block itself. I understand that if the part of the things that makes it difficult is the requirement for the daylight triangle on there, but even so, I think that this design could go a lot further in that direction to try and maintain the image and feel of the block as a whole.
Great, thanks, Peter. Other comments or questions from committee? Jean?
I just want to add my support for Peter's comments. And I really feel that Peter makes a very strong point. Not only is it the history that is involved in each of those buildings, what happened there, who went, who shopped, but it's also this front along Queen. So I just want to give support for that, for staff to understand that and continue on. It's an excellent observation. Thank you.
Thanks, Jean. Tina.
Yes, thank you. In response to some discussion that's taken place, I just wanted to let the committee know that we do have a section in our urban design manual, Design for Wildlife. There's lots of good guidelines here in terms of designing buildings to protect our wildlife and our environment, particularly migratory birds. So we look at the glazing of buildings to limit potential for reflection of trees and sky. We also encourage creating visual markers for birds. So there's lots of good policies in our urban design manual, and staff, this is something that staff looks at when we review development proposals.
Great, thanks for that, Tina. It's not something that usually comes up in heritage meetings, so helpful to know that that is there. All right, other comments on 88 to 92 Queen Street South. Ilona. You're muted, Ilona.
My comment's not just in relation to this building, but basically all the towers that we're seeing going up in our area. I'm finding that the design of the towers is all very similar, and it's very harsh. And I know that we're supposed to be able to see a difference between, the original and the new structure, but the juxtaposition there, it's quite harshly different. Is there not a design that could be used that's more of a gentle transition or a softer look? Because I'm finding that these towers they look like Lego blocks basically put on top of the structures that were there before. So that's just a question in general about the towers that have been going up in our community.
Thanks, Ilona. Do you have something else you would like to add? Okay. Any other comments or questions from committee? All right. Well, hopefully that is sufficient feedback from committee for Diksha's report that she'll be working on. And we'll move on then to our next item, which is the heritage permit application HPA 2022 IV 010 and HPA 2022 IV 011 for 16 to 20 Queen Street North, which is the construction of a new 34-story multi-unit residential building, DSD 2022231. All right, so Tina is also in attendance to help us facilitate questions. And then we also have Rachel Redshaw and Dan Curry from MHBC Planning, and they do have a 5-minute presentation, and then they can respond to questions from the committee. So I will pass it off to Rachel and Dan.
Perfect, thank you. And just to note, Dan actually was not able to attend, but I'm here as well as many members of the project team. Okie dokie. All right, good afternoon. My name is Rachel Redshaw. I'm from MHBC Planning. So I'm going to be providing a brief overview of the heritage permits for 20 Queen Street North. And I only have 5 minutes, so I'm going to be going through quite quickly. But again, we have several members of the project team here if you have any questions after the presentation. So we move to the next slide, just to quickly introduce you to the project team. Now, some of these are members of the Canadian Association of Heritage Professionals, or CAP. So Dan Curry and myself from MHBC, we're members of CAP. We have Nick Lawler from Tacoma Engineers, a member of CAP. We have PJ Materials Consultants. They specialize in a historic masonry restoration. They're members of CAP. We have ABA Architects, the architect on the team, Bell Acoustics Canada, who will be doing the vibration monitoring, Jablonski, the engineers on the team, Zara, the general contractor, as well as Momentum Developments, who are the developers. Next slide. Just give you a quick background. A draft HIA and initial draft conservation plan was submitted last year in May of 2021. A salvage and documentation plan was submitted in March of 2022, so this year. And then a second draft conservation plan, which included a temporary protection plan, so specific to the construction period, as well as the heritage permit. So we have a heritage permit for partial demolition and a heritage permit for new construction. Those were all submitted April of 2022. So the draft, second draft conservation plan was essentially a supplementary documentation for these heritage permit applications. Next slide. So basically, I'm going to describe the proposal in 3 different phases. The first phase is stabilization and partial demolition. The second is new construction, so how the facade and return will be integrated into the new building. And lastly, the restoration, which will take place after the construction is completed. Next slide. So just to clarify, so phase 1, stabilization. So stabilization happens prior, during, and after demolition and throughout the construction period. I'm not going to go through every single step, but essentially a steel structure will be installed that will sandwich, for lack of better words, the facade to stabilize it. So you can see here in the image that structure there, that's the steel structure. The installation uses existing window openings, so there'll be no penetrations into the main facade above the grade. As part of the retention, there'll be threaded rods inserted at each level or story on the returns or wings. So I'm talking about the returns. So there'll be 6 penetrations in total, so 3 on each side. These rods are inserted from the interior and the holes are filled with epoxy, and there'll still be 1 layer or width of brick on either side, so it won't be penetrating all the way through the exterior of the brick. So we can move to the next slide. So in the same phase, there's the partial demolition. So the demolition plan was designed by Tacoma, who is a member, Nick, who is a member of the Canadian Association of Heritage Professionals. So you can see here steps that were taken out from the demolition plan. So they are going to be using conventional demolition techniques. And here again, you can see a sketch with the steel structure in place. You can see it's actually going again through that window opening. So that structure is going to be in place while removing the building fabric outside of the facade perimeter. So we move to the next slide. So this is about the new construction. Again, I'm not going to go through all these steps, but just kind of give you a summary. So the new construction will rely on the retention structure that's shown below and that I described in the return. So those 3 penetrations at each level. The integration involves connections every 500 millimeters around the entire perimeter of the facade. Threaded rods will be inserted from the interior and then filled with epoxy, and they will not penetrate the front facade, as again, there'll be 1 layer of brick that will be remaining, so the rods will not be visible from the exterior. And again, the new construction is a 34-story building with 240 units and a community benefit space. And we'll move on to the next slide, So last phase is restoration. A restoration plan was designed by PJ Materials Consultants, again, who specialize in historic masonry restoration. They've been established or in the business since 1989. So the plan identifies issues as well as remediation of these issues, and the techniques are consistent with the standards and guidelines for the conservation of historic places in Canada. So here's just a sample of some of the issues that they identified and how they would be remedied. Go to the next slide. So you may want to ask what measures are going to be put in place to ensure the protection and conservation of the facade and the returns. Now, a temporary protection plan has been created and submitted to staff. It includes the vibration monitoring. So again, vibration monitoring is going to be throughout the construction period. There's also an engineer certificate, so it's a certification from an engineer that the new building will be constructed in a manner that's sensitive to the front facade and returns. There's also a demolition and stabilization plan and a risk management plan. So if something doesn't go to plan, what do you do? So they're planning on having a designation bylaw registered on title in conjunction with a heritage conservation easement. So it's the designation bylaw is supposed to go to council June 20th. So this month to be passed. So they've already passed the period, the objection period for the notice of intention to designate. So now we're at the stage where a designation bylaw will be passed to protect the facade and the returns. And again, we're in the process of establishing a heritage conservation easement. The municipality will hold a letter of credit or security, which will not be released until they have certification that the conservation goals have been implemented and implemented appropriately. Next slide. So this is not directly related, but you may be wondering about in terms of salvage, because we did mention demolition. So again, a salvage documentation plan has been submitted to city staff. That plan identifies building material that is proposed to be salvaged, identifies the location, the method of extraction, and then who would be doing or responsible for that extraction. And it also talks about the reuse of some of the materials. So the repurposing of material will be in common areas, particularly the community benefit space. Next slide. And in terms of documentation, there's photographic documentation of the building. They also have a virtual tour. So if anybody's familiar with iGuide, it's really popular with real estate. So after the demolition, it is possible for one to virtually tour 20 Queen Street. There's also 3D scanning that's been done on the building, on the exterior and the interior. So there is the possibility that down the road, someone could recreate architectural features from the interior with possibly a 3D printer. Not the same thing, but just to say that there's a possibility that that could be done. There's architectural drawings that have been done of the elevations as well as the floor plans, and they also have facsimile of the blueprints by W.H.E. Schmaltz and Charles Knechtel from the University of Waterloo Library. Next slide. So that is the end of my presentation. I only have 5 minutes, but again, we have several members of the project team here for any questions that you may have.
Great, thanks, Rachel. We do also have a delegation, I believe. So we have Carl Kessler. I'm just making sure that Carl is actually here. Yeah, from the Architectural Conservancy, North Waterloo Region Branch, who will also be providing a 5-minute presentation to the committee. So Carl, you have 5 minutes as well.
Thank you. A year ago, you recommended designation of the exterior along with interiors to be determined of the former economical building. Architectural Conservancy Ontario, North Waterloo Region, and many members of the public argued in favor of this. ACO branches across our province help their communities think about buildings in context and offer perspectives on their potential and stewardship. Branches were established at different times when communities expressed the need for organized advocacy toward a moderate, selective conservation approach to their built fabric. So now we feel called in this case to underscore it has been demonstrated cultural heritage exists. It's the cultural inheritance of a community. And it includes things like common ownership of an accumulated, evolving, often place-based identity. Further, the cultural heritage of anyone should be the joint responsibility of everyone, with implications for our civic, social, environmental, political responsibility. Further, a building in private property ownership can acquire an integral component of public cultural ownership. It's been demonstrated 1620 Queen North is an exemplary cultural heritage building. The interior is, if it's as it was a year ago, a rare, remarkably intact, beautifully executed example of its kind, a trove of local craft by a notable local architect who designed the 1924 City Hall, demolished in 1973, which had much in common with this interior. It has not been demonstrated, especially in this case, although it's been suggested, that retaining mostly intact some of the best of our existing buildings meaningfully impedes urban intensification, housing affordability, or even development generally. It's not been demonstrated, although it's been suggested, that the retention of this piece of cultural heritage must mean the diminishment of other cultural heritage. It's not been demonstrated, although it's been suggested, that opponents to this demolition are expressing NIMBYism with regard to tall buildings for so many reasons, but mainly this development was opposed at Heritage Kitchener and Council specifically because it requires the demolition of this particular heritage building. It has not been demonstrated, although it's been suggested, that designating the interior of a building sets a persuasive precedent that undermines private property rights. In fact, historical precedents, including that the precedent of this past year for this building, suggests just the opposite. It's not been demonstrated that due mainly to soil contamination at the rear, removing nearly all the existing building is the only feasible way to adaptively reuse or redevelop here. That is what the proposal suggested, but city staff a year ago suggested council could consider several other options, one of which included investigating remediation that might spare more of the building. And I'm not sure actually if that was done or not. It has been demonstrated that it's extremely difficult to designate a building if the owner is opposed. But the cultural heritage of a building, its artistic merit, doesn't depend on the momentary ownership of a building. Its disposition as real estate depends on that. Without better reconciling ownership and stewardship, built heritage becomes irrelevant. It has been demonstrated, we believe, that the outcome that's before us is the intersection of property rights, personal preference, planning, and political will. And all that's fair. It's fair game for debate. But for us to suggest that more compelling reasons really lie elsewhere in light of all the evidence, it seems disingenuous to us. Thanks for listening.
Great, thank you, Carl. All right, so this heritage permit application will require a motion, but before we get there, I want to open it up to the committee for questions, for either questions to staff or to the planning group or to Carl, as well as any comments. So, committee. Peter.
This project, when it was before the committee previously, the committee gave a pretty clear message at the time that this building has value both from the outside and from the inside, and that what was proposed was half the project, that the interiors of this building were as important and as significant as the exterior, and that both merited designation. And so now we have the final product, and we have what is the precedent-setting project for facadism as a solution to heritage conservation. And while it's pretty from the outside, it's extremely disappointing to lose a building interior of the significance, and that there really, I believe that there could have been substantially more done in order to try to preserve or recreate the interiors of this building. So I'm kind of sad to see that we've reached this point. I'm afraid I can't support the motion for that reason. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. Other comments? Robin?
Yeah, I just want to add to what Peter said. I'm on this committee because I believe that the definition of heritage in our community is evolving. And I think that there is a lot of NIMBYism out there right now. But this project and keeping this building is not one of those pieces in terms of like we as a committee have had a lot of really intense discussions over the last year about various projects and demolitions and all these things. And I see a lot of value having driven, like I live quite close to that space. I live up on Weaver and Cameron, and I drive down Queen there almost every day. And I know from talking to my roommate who used to work for the Symphony that the interior of that building is quite well preserved, has been enjoyed. And so this feels to me like an example of a developer that is not listening in terms of, like I know there's a lot of intense discussions happening right now around the core and development, and I'm generally 90% in favor of making change happen because we need to. We've got a climate crisis happening. We need air conditioning. We need all these things. But we also need beautiful spaces to enjoy in our community that people can come together in. And I think that this building is an example of that. And I believe, as was also expressed previously, is one of the only examples locally of maintained structure from the architect that created the original Kitchener City Hall. And so all of that to say this is one of those gems. And so I echo what Peter says. I'm disappointed to not see more efforts made when it has been in use. This is one, not a derelict property. This is a property that has been used.
Thanks, Robin. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I think Peter has really stated this on a number of occasions this afternoon. What is happening here, I know when it first came to council, I couldn't support it. It's a beautiful building. There's so much history to the building, but also the architecture of the building it's going to all be lost. And I just it's a crime as far as I'm concerned, because we don't have many buildings like this. This to me, it challenged the Mutual Life building up on the border of Kitchener and Waterloo. And I'm sure technology now, we can capture a lot of pictures and a lot of shapes and all of what it was like. But to think that it's all going to perish is terrible. And quite frankly, I blame. I'm not going to blame the developer. The developer is going to do whatever they can do. I really blame this. This goes down as a blight on the council of today, who have not defended and protected the structure, the building that we have, with so much history, with everything that we'll have lots of pictures of it, I guess, but we'll never be able to see it again, to sit in those rooms. It's just I could go on and on, but I'm sorry, I can't. I won't be supporting if it ever comes to depend on our support. I won't be supporting anything to do with this development. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gazzola. Just want to make sure everyone can hear me because my computer is doing some very wonky things right now. I got some smiles, so I'm assuming that you can hear me. Okay, thank you. Okay, Ilona.
Yes, I had a question in regards to the contamination and the reason why the entire building, except for the facade, has to be destroyed. So given that the reason for only preserving the facade is that there is mercury contamination in the rear corner, how severe is this mercury contamination? And what methods of remediation are being used to address this? Is there not another way around this so that we can preserve more of the building rather than have to destroy everything except the facade? Is there not another way, another option that we can look at? So I'll leave it at that.
Not sure who might be best to answer that question.
Sure, I can help address that question for sure. So there's many reasons as to why we took the approach that we did. One of the big ones definitely being contamination. There's a very high level of mercury beneath the building. I think the previous delegate had said it's at the rear of the building. There are a couple hits. The main one's actually at the front, the Queen Street side of the building. And part of the residential development process is you have to receive a record of site condition from the Ministry of Environment. And there's very stringent requirements for residential uses, which is obviously great because people spend a lot of time in there. There can be almost no risk that contaminants due to previous land uses on and around the site can have any impact on people living in the building. And because it's mercury, it's very hard to protect against that in any other way. And also with groundwater, Kitchener has a very shallow water table, so the water table is actually very close to the surface. It enters into an off-site risk where the mercury has the potential to move off-site. So that's not currently happening. And what we've identified as really the only way to move forward with that is to remove the mercury and take it to a regulated landfill site where they can dispose of it permanently and safely.
Great, thank you for that, Tyler. Councillor Gazzola, is this a new hand?
Yeah, yes, it is. I just want to make a comment on that. You know, I'm not an engineer and I'm not an architect. I'm what they used to call a bean counter. So a lot of what I'm saying is from emotion, perhaps, but I have seen so much contamination cleaned up in our downtown. We've cleaned up blocks and blocks all around where the old post office building was, all around where the Gauco Street area. We had heavy contamination there from electric, from old gas plants, and the technology was that, and this was now 20, 25 years ago, or 10, 15 years ago, that we've been able to clean up so much of this contamination. And I have to believe that the technology has improved greatly in the last 10, 15 years. So I can't buy the fact that because of the whatever contamination there was there, we have to tear the whole building down. I don't have the engineering facts. I don't have the architectural facts, but I believe in the fullness of time that we're going to find that wasn't, it didn't have to come down.
Right.
Sorry. Thank you.
You're right.
Thank you, Councillor Gazzola. Other comments from committee members? Jean?
Thank you, Chair Sam. I have several questions for staff. I'm just wondering when Council passed the recommendation from Heritage Kitchener in December 2015 that if there was no appeal for the intention to designate, which was 28 days, like following the intent to designate, that why we are not following our own recommendations approved by council, that a designation by law should be passed. So I do not understand why it is not passed. Can staff answer that?
Yeah, we'll just give the process a moment for Diksha to potentially respond and then type to Tina. All right, Tina.
Yes, thank you. So Diksha may be typing an answer to me. What I can advise in the staff report that the notice of intention to designate was published on June 30th, 2021. The designating bylaw has not been passed. That is due to some other processes in motion, identifying what needs to be in that bylaw. So the decision has already been made to designate, and what to designate is just making sure that that bylaw details that decision. Let me just see here. Diksha's just messaged me. Yeah, so again, she's just reiterating what I've just advised the committee, that the notice to designate was passed on June 28, 2021. So it's just working out the details of what are in that designating bylaw, but that the decision of what to designate has already been made by council. Staff are implementing this decision. The proposal has received approval in principle, subject, which is a site plan approval in principle, which is subject to receiving, which is subject to conditions. One of them is obviously getting the permits here from Heritage Kitchener.
If I may, then there's a little hedging on what this bylaw is about. And in the report, we have now identified a number of items from the interior that, shall we say, there seems to be some agreement to save, but will they be part of the designating bylaw?
Just wait for our process.
Yeah.
And Tina, whenever you're able to, you can just go ahead.
I realized I was on mute. Diksha has advised that the interior attributes will be noted in the designating bylaw.
Right, thank you. If I may, Chair Sam, I am very concerned about how we're talking conservation. We're going to demolish. We have bricks, tons of bricks. We know that there's a shortage of building materials these days. And I would like to know whether, in fact, that has there been a demand to conserve all the bricks? And if there isn't, why are we not asking them to do that? For staff.
All right, and we'll once again wait. I'm very impressed with how quickly Diksha is typing answers to all of these questions. So.
Me too, because I'm on the spot here trying to provide you some answers. So yeah, so as per the recommendation, there is a salvage and documentation plan that's required, and this will document the salvage of these materials wherever possible. So that is one of the conditions of the heritage permit.
Are you saying then that all these bricks will be required to be cleaned and saved?
That will be documented in the salvage salvage plan where possible. So we will do all we can to ensure that they are salvaged. What can be, where possible, is. That is the intent. The intent is to do all we can. So that's part of the condition of the permit.
Okay, thank you. I have another question. It has to do with bonusing. I'm astounded. We learned a year ago that it was about 24 stories. Now it's stated 34 stories. And I'm flabbergasted because I learned that, at least what the media says, that we're going to provide, or the provision for the parking is going to be in our city public garage. To me, I would think that's enough bonusing. And so are we doing 10 more stories because the developer has offered to save a few interior features? Is that how this bonusing happened or happens?
The applicant may be able to speak to the bonusing, but what I can advise you is there are bonusing options in our downtown, and we bonus for certain items that is worked out through the site plan approval process. So the applicant has been working with staff in terms of what the bonusing items are and what can be bonused for, and that's worked through the site plan approval process and then implemented into a Section 37 agreement, which is registered on title to ensure that those community benefits are provided.
Right. So my final comment is this. Probably for some people, because it talks about housing, and we look at the front, that's being conserved. So to take up on the developer's idea with the balconies, highlighting the conservatory, it probably makes a good song to the public. It sounds generous what's happening. But as you heard Mr. Kessler on behalf of the Architectural Conservancy talk about, and my awareness of the building and everybody else's awareness, this is an exemplary building. It's in great shape. It's rare, remarkable. It demonstrates local crafts, trades. It's perfectly excellent building and its shape. And for me, this business about how we're conserving, it makes a mockery of us talking about heritage and conservation. And I will not be supporting this at all. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks, Jean. Other comments from committee? All right, I have a couple. So first, I want to provide a little bit of credit to the development team because I think that there is a lot of difficult things to try and balance here. And so I appreciate that it can be really difficult to try and, develop in a downtown area, that there are environmental hazards and concerns that have to be dealt with. And so I appreciate the difficulties of all of that. And I also appreciate that you've done your diligence to try and figure out some different ways to address these things. I also want to note that I do really appreciate the effort that's been put into cataloging and creating like a virtual reality, I guess, of the interior of the building. We know, especially for the past couple of years, that virtual is not at all the same as in person, but I think it does help to know that there will be some catalog of that will be accessible to the public, which it is meaningful in some ways. All of that said, this was really disappointing to see on the agenda today. Another demolition of a building, and in this case, a building that the building in and of itself is in good condition, and it is something that the community clearly values. And it's really unfortunate that the rationale for the demolition is not the building itself, because we see a lot of demolition applications come through this committee, and typically we see that those are demolition by neglect, and that's just not the case in this building. And so it's really disappointing to see that. I will also say that I was disappointed that this permit application came to our committee before the designating bylaw has been passed by council. I know that there's the intent to pass that bylaw, but it does make our job much more difficult when we don't actually know if there is a designation on this building or what specifically is being designated. And so there is also a bit of a process issue here that I'm disappointed by. And so I want to note that for everyone involved, that it's concerning to me actually that there is this application to demolish the building while we're still in the process of trying to figure out what is to be kept. So I have a lot of concerns. I recognize that it's a difficult position that the developers and the heritage team are in here. I also at this point can't support the demolition of the building. I need more information around the designation. And I also just feel that I still need more information around the alternative options that could be available to preserve more than just the facade, as many of my co-committee members have mentioned a little bit earlier in this meeting. Those are my comments. So I'm now going to shift over and put my committee chair hat back on. So any final comments from members of the committee? All right, seeing none, it's always great fun to have the last word. We do, I believe, need a motion for this item. So is there anyone willing to move this item so that we can vote on it?
Through you, Madam Chair?
Yep.
If I might interject, when a motion is not moved by a member of the committee, the result is the same as a refusal by the committee. Regardless, the recommendation of the committee with respect to this matter will proceed to council for their consideration and ultimate decision at the June 20th meeting of council.
Great, thank you so much for that, Sarah. So that's very helpful. So if anyone does wish to make the motion to allow us to vote, that would
I'll move
helpful.
the motion.
Okay, thank you, Alona. All right, so we will move to the motion. And this one is quite lengthy and my computer is only partially working, so I apologize. I'm going to be reading it off of my phone here. So please bear with me. So the motion that we have before us is that pursuant to sections 32 and 34, section 30, part 2 and 34 of the Ontario Heritage Act, Heritage Permit Application HPA 2022 IV 010 be approved to permit the partial demolition, excluding the front facade and portions of the returns of the subject property municipally addressed as 16 to 20 Queen Street North, subject to the following conditions. 1, that the final heritage impact assessment and conservation plan be submitted and approved by the Director of Planning prior to the issuance of a heritage permit. And 2, the final temporary protection plan, including a demolition plan and stabilization plan, a final documentation and salvage plan, and a final risk management plan be submitted to the satisfaction of the city's manager of development review and the city's heritage planner prior to the issuance of a heritage permit. And 3, that a final vibration monitoring plan be submitted to the satisfaction of the city's manager of development review and the city's heritage planner prior to the issuance of a heritage permit. And 4, that the owner obtain heritage approval under the Ontario Heritage Act and a building permit under the building code for the 34-story residential tower prior to the issuance of a demolition permit. 2, that pursuant to sections 30 part 2 and 33 of the Ontario Heritage Act, heritage permit application HPA 2022 IV 011 be approved to permit the new construction of a 34-story residential tower on the subject property municipally addressed as 16 to 20 Queen Street North, subject to the following conditions. 1, that the final heritage impact assessment and conservation plan be submitted and approved by the Director of Planning prior to the issuance of a heritage permit. And 2, that a final temporary protection plan, including a demolition plan and stabilization plan, a final documentation and salvage plan, and a final risk management plan be submitted to the satisfaction of the city's manager of development review and the city's heritage planner prior to the issuance of a heritage permit. And 3, that a final vibration monitoring plan be submitted to the satisfaction of the city's manager of development review and the city's heritage planner prior to the issuance of a heritage permit. And 4, that the owner obtain heritage approval under the Ontario Heritage Act and a building permit under the building code for the 34-story residential tower prior to the issuance of a demolition permit. And that's the motion. So it is in 2 parts. The first is to permit the partial demolition, and the second part is to permit the new construction, but it is all part of one motion, so we will be voting once. I'm gonna pause to make sure that I didn't confuse any of that, so Sarah can correct me if I'm wrong.
Through you, Madam Chair, that was read as I understood and as outlined in the staff's report.
Perfect. Thank you, Sarah. All right. So as per our usual system, we will vote by roll. So we'll begin with Councillor Chapman.
I'm opposed to the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Gazzola.
Opposed.
Thank you. Robin.
Opposed.
Thank you. Jean.
Opposed.
Thank you. Peter.
Opposed.
Myself, I am opposed. Ilona.
Opposed.
Thank you. And I believe that brings us to the end of our committee members. Have I missed anyone? All right, the motion fails. We have refused the motion. It will nonetheless go to City Council for June 20th with the note that it has been refused by Heritage Kitchener's committee. Okay, so we will then move on to our final item for today, which is our subcommittee updates. And I know many of you have struggled to meet in the last month because it has been very busy, but we will go through our updates now anyway, and you can let us know what the plans are for the next couple of months because we do have no meeting in July. So first up is decolonizing the heritage process. Robin.
Thank you, Sam. We have not had a chance to meet, but we've been trying to schedule a meeting, which I feel is just as much labor at this time for folks with everything reopening. And I believe we are meeting Friday morning, the June 24th at 9:15 a.m. If that does not sound correct to other people coming to that meeting, please tell me. I too have been very busy and have just come out of a election coma. So anyways, looking forward to it and hope everyone has a good rest of their month.
Great, thanks, Robin. I will move on to designation in the municipal, oh my gosh, the Municipal Heritage Register. Peter, this is your subcommittee.
Yes, thank you. I'm afraid that the committee did not meet this month. I had to cancel our meeting at the last minute due to some personal circumstances. We are scheduled to meet on the 29th of June, and we will report back at the next meeting.
Great, thanks, Peter. Effects of heritage designation on affordability. This is Martin. Martin is not here. The report from that subcommittee is also that they have not met, but they are continuing to work on their recommendations and their research. And they did have a meeting with staff regarding compensation or like recognition rather for folks from the academic universities who are helping out with some of that research. And I do not have further details of that meeting because unfortunately, I also had personal circumstances at the last minute that prevented me from attending. But I'm sure Martin can provide a more fulsome update at the next meeting on where everything lies with that. All right, and promoting cultural heritage, Jean.
Thank you, Sam. So our committee did meet, and it's all about proposed events So I'm going to back up. We have one discussion about walking tour for Lower and Upper Dune, and we are planning a planning meeting this week with the residents of Lower Dune. For this walking tour, it's yet to be determined. So there will be involvement. We're reaching out, and there will be involvement from the residents. The second one, I do believe that earlier in all this, we were talking about how can we make more people aware of heritage in the community and reaching out to different people in the community. So we have reached out because of a request that's come to us for a garden tour, and it's going to involve the front yards of 3 properties in Civic Center Heritage Conservation District and the gardens around 70 Queen Street North. And this request came from Garden Kitchener, which is formerly the Horticultural Society. And the tour for this is an evening, July the 12th. So that's the update on the promotion. I have a couple more questions, but they're not to do with committee work, but just observation about all these towers and also one on the status updates with respect to what's the workload. So I don't know, Sam, when that could become possible.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
So let's just finish up our item on the subcommittees, and then we can do status updates and information items, and that would be the appropriate time for that.
Thank you.
Okay, any questions or comments on any of the subcommittee updates? I know there was not a lot, so. All right, great. Thank you again to everyone for all your work on the subcommittees. I know it's a lot of extra work and that you're all putting a lot of time and effort into it. So I appreciate that. And I look forward to seeing where everyone is at our August meeting. All right, status updates. So we have, as part of our agenda package, some status updates around, sorry, all of my computer files have now crashed, so I'm glad I'm still here. Around the heritage best practices and priorities, as well as the heritage impact assessment follow-ups. There's no specific status updates, I don't believe, today, but if Diksha through Tina can confirm that, that would be great.
That is correct. There are no status updates.
Perfect, thank you. All right, so then our next item is around information items, and we do have the heritage permit application tracking sheet in our agenda package. So you are able to check out where everything is in the process for heritage permit applications. And this, Jean, is where I will pass the floor to you for your question.
Okay, so I have 2, but the first one has to do for staff with respect to item number 4 on that tracking sheet. It has to do with the bridges here in the Dune bridges. And I just wondered whether the contract has been let for the Dune Bridge work. It's item number 4 on the heritage permit, I believe. Yeah, it's HPA 2022 V004 bridge, Dune Bridge number 1 and 2, bridge rehabilitation. I just wondered if the contract has gone out or tendered or anything yet.
Diksha through Tina.
Diksha has advised that she has no knowledge.
Okay, thank you. if you don't mind keeping me informed so the neighbors know what's up, appreciate it.
Yes.
Last, if I may, Sam, the last concern I have, today we have requests for approval for 3 apartment towers, and there are towers going up all around King and Victoria. With bonusing, it would appear that their height can be more than, I would say, a so-called minor variance from 24 to 34 stories, for example, so dwarfing the original heritage to be saved. And I understand it seems to be with zoning, but I don't understand how the bonusing happens. And then I have to ask about the towers. Is it the intent of planning staff to have, with council's blessing, towers lining side by side all along King Street, Victoria, Frederick, Queen, and more? High-rise towers completely, nothing in between for families. And which developer applicant gets the okay for a tower? Is it fair playing ground for all developers or whoever comes first with an ask and a proposal? What is the plan for where and type of tower that gets approved? And is it the intent to have demolition of all the buildings along these streets to accommodate all the new towers? Is reuse of the existing structure being considered? And so I know these are not exactly Heritage Kitchener decisions, but they play, in my opinion, a major effect in the long-term vitality of the streetscapes, environment, survival of schools in the inner city, and indirectly, the towers will play some type of role in local heritage and its survival. So I just don't understand. I get it with the LRT, and I know as a counselor, I was part and parcel of talking about intensification. But this is not the play that was shed to the people of the region. It was not tower upon tower upon tower. It was at most 10, and then we were to have mixed use and all the rest. So I don't understand the tower bit. And maybe it's not fair to ask you at this time, Tina, or maybe it's should be left for another time. So if you want to respond, or if we should wait for another time, I'm okay by that.
Sure, I can try and respond. You've raised a number of issues and points, so I'll try to go from memory to respond to each of them. Maybe back up and give you some history as it relates to land use and zoning in the downtown. Our official plan was approved in 2014, which had a vision for the downtown of a low FSR, a low floor space ratio, with the vision of being able to bonus for additional floor space ratio. We were working on zoning to implement that, and unfortunately, the province changed the bonusing regulations and eliminated that for us. So the bonusing regulations and zoning could not be implemented as we envisioned. The city is undergoing a visioning exercise right now for our downtown. There's been a subcommittee that's been set up. So that will inform the land use and zoning moving forward with the elimination of bonusing. So how do we want to see our downtown develop? So that is occurring right now. Bonusing as we see it in our current zoning bylaw will be eliminated as of September 18th. So applicants are no longer going to be able to bonus. So that's likely why you're seeing a bit of a proliferation of towers right now under the bonusing. People are trying to get those in before they can no longer do that on September 18th. As it relates to the number of towers and such, we have tall building guidelines for our downtown for the entire city, and they stipulate the height as it relates to setbacks from property lines. So making sure that each tower is appropriately set back in position as it relates to other properties and their property rights. The vision for our downtown has evolved and changed, especially with LRT. The city has started with looking at the land use with our planning on rapid transit station area plans. which were implemented through a new official plan. But there's been a lot of changes even since those plans were done. And now that the region is looking at LRT planning, once they establish the boundaries in the region's official plan, the city will establish them in ours. And again, it correlates, it's intertwined with that visioning exercise that the city is doing right now for the land use in our downtown.
If I may, I just find it very difficult to deal with all the demolition. And we're a conservation committee. And also, I think it's been pointed out how many people are being displaced because they are in affordable housing. It's probably maybe not great, but at least it's affordable. And I'm really concerned about how all this is playing out. So where is the talk? Where is the talk going to come? And the thought, and not be overrun by, shall we say, the development influence. The residents want a city. They're there to live there. The developers put the foundation in the ground, and then when it's done, take off. But we're left with, where's the schools? Where's the health care? Where's the fire? Where's the police? Where's the affordable housing? Where are the parks? Where are the parks? How can we lose? Anyway, maybe you can't answer that, Tina, right now, but there needs to be some answer.
Yeah, as planners, we balance a number of interests and objectives. That's our job. And it starts with community engagement and consultation, and that's where we're starting with the downtown. So right now that process is underway. That's the starting point, and then planners will take all that information, balance the interests, and come up an appropriate vision and guiding direction, land use zoning for our downtown for the future.
Thank you.
I have an additional question. So as part of that visioning, does it include identifying those gems like 16 to 20 Queen Street so that we don't have the same situation happen again where this kind of a building is being destroyed? Can we identify those jewels that we want to save now so that, you know, the ones that come to us that are not of great cultural heritage value, you know, it's not that serious an issue, but those ones that are the gems, can we not find a way to identify them now and preserve them, put whatever we can in place to not allow them to be destroyed before we get to the point where we have this kind of a situation that we have with 1620 Queen?
Yep, those are good points. And heritage planners are part of that team, that visioning team. So that will be top of mind and on their radar as they move forward with the engagement on the new zoning and land use for the downtown.
Thanks.
All right, any other comments or questions about heritage permit application tracking, which is technically the agenda item that we are on? All right, seeing none, that brings us to the end of our meeting. 43 minutes ahead of schedule because we did extend this meeting. So very efficient. Well done, everyone. So that is probably a good thing that we didn't go until 7 o'clock because my brain is done. So we will adjourn the meeting for this month. We are off in July, so I hope you all have a pleasant beginning to your summer. You're able to take some rest for yourselves and hopefully get a little bit of work done on your subcommittees. A girl can always dream.